Since the beginning of time, man's necessities has always consisted of food, shelter, and water. As time went on, mankind started to build more stable structures that provided protection from natural elements and predators. The main purpose of shelter is to protect from wind and rain and to provide a home that can adapt to both hot and cold weather. Shelter shields against insects and wild animals while also protecting from danger. Living in the trees kept off some rain and protected from non-climbing animals. Caves were then found and provided a less exposed environment for living that protected from wind, rain, and cold. Once simple tools were made, shelters started to be built. These shelters were made from natural material that was available. Once clay was learned how to be made, shelters then began to be built by drying small blocks of clay in the sun and piling them on top of each other. This created a more stable structure. As human culture evolved, so did the structures of their shelter. Come, let's look at the types of housing through the ages.
The earliest known form of shelter were nests built in tall trees. Nest building is a routine behavior learned by young apes from their mother, typically around the age of 3. A new nest is built at least once a day from weaning branches inwards by bending, breaking, and interweaving them into a platform. It can take a great ape anywhere from 1 to 5 minutes to make a nest. The size and shape of the nest varies depending on who built them, but the primary use is always for sleeping. The placement of shelter within the tree also varies. The presence of possible predators such as lions, leopards, hyenas, or wild dogs would cause an ape to have to build the nest higher within the tree. Nests were not shared, except by mothers and their infants. It was normal for apes to sleep in the nest for one night and abandon the shelter the next morning, resulting in the need to construct a new one, even if the maker had not traveled very far during that day. In a lifetime, an individual ape may build over 19,000 different nests. This simple shelter created a secure and protective environment for great apes.
Caves were used as an important tool for survival. The cave offered shelter from wind, rain, and cold as well, and also served as a secure place to hide from attacking enemies. Caves are formed within rocks, like carbonate rock or sandstone. In caves, rituals were performed and art was produced. Caves were not inhabited for long, even though they remained stable for long periods of time. The caves had natural light, temperature changes, and moisture conditions from the openness. Not only would the caves be a welcome relief from the temperature, but also a great shelter from the enemy. The relatively small opening and rock walls several hundreds of feet thick would have provided a secure shelter. The small opening of caves were easy to block off or guard, providing protection against an aggressor. The caves were also perfect places to get out of rain or a snowstorm.
Confronted with the need for a shelter against sun or rain, the natural instinct is to lean some form of protective shield against a support, a leafy branch for example, against the trunk of a tree. Tents were often built out of tree branches. It was common to use a tree trunk as the main support for the structure. However, tree trunks were always available. Tree branches can be leaned against each other, creating a V shape. With chopping tools, branches were hacked from young trees. The branches are then formed into a rough circle, which were held in place by burying them in the ground. The tops of the branches were bent and twisted together so that the finished hut was tent-shaped. Nomadic tents were larger than most modern tents, having 2 separate sections, the front and the back. The front section was used for work. This was the public area of the tent, open to visitors. The men of the family lived here where they gathered with family members or friends and conducted business. The men ate their meals in this area. The front part of the tent would be left open in warm weather. The rear part of the tent was private. A dividing curtain separated it from the front area. This was where the women, children, and babies lived and slept. Nomadic tents were made from goat's hair or dark sheep's wool, woven in rectangular strips on large looms. Women wove the fabric for the tents, stitched them together, and kept them in good repair.
Settling down was important to the business of agriculture. Instead of hunting and gathering, permanent settlements become a factor of life. Once clay was learned how to be made, it was used to build roundhouses. Roundhouses were built using materials made available to them by nature. The walls of roundhouses were either dry stone filled in with clay and straw, or a ring of supported poles weaved with long flexible sticks and plastered in a mixture of clay, sand, straw, and manure, which is called daub. The supported poles are usually around 4 to 6 inches thick and straight with their ends charred in a fire. The supported poles are then buried about 8 to 12 inches deep. The daub is smeared about an inch thick onto both sides of the flexible sticks. After the walls of the roundhouses were built, the roof poles are raised and bound with hazel rods and rope. The roof is made of straw with mud thrown on top in order to keep the heat inside the roundhouse.
Roundhouses provided a stable home, but the shape wasn't very functional. Straight lines and rectangles have proved to be a more practical use. Straight walls with windows became very popular around 6500 BC. These structures were made primarily out of mud brick. The inside was plastered and often had painted murals of people and animals on the walls. Each building adjoined with each other, similar to the cells in a honeycomb. The houses were typically rectangular with windows but no doors. The entrance to each structure could be found on the roof, resulting in the movement within the settlement to mainly consist of walking across the roof of all the homes. The entryways also served as chimneys for the fireplaces found inside. It was common to use a ladder in order to enter the buildings. The ladders were drawn in after all the people entered. This was one way the occupants created security. These Neolithic homes have many of the standard features that can be found in most human settlements. They provided not only shelter, but also created a sense of community for those who lived within them.
Since the beginning of time, shelter has been an extremely important aspect. Due to their arboreal lifestyle, great apes lived in tall trees and built nests in them. Evolution led to being primarily bipedal, meaning that most time was spent on the ground. When walking around, natural sources were discovered like caves. These structures provided a shelter from rain, wind, and cold. As our ancestors developed a nomadic lifestyle, they needed to have a shelter that was easy to move and reset up. The discovery of how to make tools helped to build tents that complemented to their nomadic lifestyle. When the agricultural evolution began, our ancestors learned to make advanced tools to create a more stable shelter. The creation of clay resulted in roundhouses. As time evolved, our ancestors developed a sense of community and permanent housing. Straight walls with windows provided a home for our ancestors to live permanently and is still the same structure that Homo sapiens use today. The evolution of shelter has adapted, along with the evolution of humans, both cognitively and culturally.